America's iconic cartoons that the boomer Gen X generation grew up with came from the creative world of Hanna-Barbera. Looney Tunes cartoons had nothing on Hanna-Barbera cartoons during that time, from being timed out, written to be aged well as quick pacing and funny effects, as well as theme songs. Hanna-Barbera paved the way for the evolution of today's modern cartoons, despite its inevitable collapse throughout the years along with a few legal battles. But how did this even happen? In order to understand Hanna-Barbera, we have to know both William Hanna and Joseph Barbera. Let's start here first. William Hanna, the main founder, was a construction engineer, while Joseph Barbera was a tailor delivery boy during the Great Depression. Joseph always had a knack for cartoons and drawings, while William was an avid lyricist and writer. William, during his time, would lose his job as an engineer and work as a cartoonist for Herming Icing Animation Studios, and would work on Looney Tunes, Merry Melodies, and cartoons such as Captain and the Kids. Joseph Barbera, an alumni of the Pratt Institute and Art Students League of New York, would work for Van Buren and Terrytoon Studios, while in 1937 would move to the MGM Studios in Burbank, California. Message! Joseph Barbera went to MGM for a higher salary, while William Hanna was appointed head of animation. The two would meet and work side by side with each other at the same desk. This meeting of the creators would make the first Hanna-Barbera cartoon after Louis B. Mayer wanted to revolutionize the animation department. Because Captain and the Kids was failing to meet viewership, William Hanna crafted the first concept of the first conflict character cartoon, but at the time it was a fox and dog before it was a cat and mouse. Hanna-Barbera would then pitch this concept to Fred Quimby, who at the time did not like the concept but decided to greenlight the production for one theatrical short. The short would be called Puss Gets the Boot in 1940. At the time, the cat and mouse were called Jasper and Jinx, while the caretaker was called Mammy Two Shoes. Mammy. It was a different time. I like chicken. This would be the start of the Tom and Jerry formula. Critics would claim that this was the cartoon to change the course of MGM cartoon production. Puss Gets the Boot would be the first short by the duo to be nominated for an Academy Award. That was nominated to Fred Quimby. Businesswoman Bessa Short makes a call to MGM and wants more cartoons on the cat and mouse duo. By this time, the name was called to a contest at the studio, which John Carr won for a prize of $50. Still, it was the Great Depression. After the name was announced came the first episode, The Midnight Snack, in 1941. Hanna-Barbera was well known for their inking, painting, sense of timing, story construction, as well as song and lyrics. The most difficult part of the cartoons are the scores called the 12-tone technique, originally coined by Arnold Schoenberg. Composer Scott Bradley would have certain difficulties with timing out the cartoons, along with composing on the 12-tone time, which gave the cartoons life as well as timed out steps and actions. While Tom and Jerry takes off from MGM, the animation studio would close down in 1951, but would be a big blow-up for the duo. After MGM Animation shuts down and Fred Quimby retires, George Sidney would pick up Hanna-Barbera and convince Screen Gems to fund HB. Henry Cohn, then president of Columbia Pictures, would take the newly formed company at 18% stock under HB Enterprises. After this deal, Screen Gems would be distributor and licensing for the new company, while also taking over the Kling Studios offices 1 year after the closing of MGM Animation on July 7th of 1957. The first Hanna-Barbera original was The Rough and Ready Show, airing on NBC on December 14th of 1957. Following in 1958 is The Huckleberry Hound Show with The Pixie and Dixie and Mr. Jinx Show, which would take home an Emmy. Because of the successes of both HB originals, animation heavy hitters would take to the company, such as Ibo Takamoto, Ken Spears, Joe Ruby, and Michael Matisse. By 1959, short films such as Loopy-de-Loop and The Quick Draw McGraw Show would take to the theaters. Hanna-Barbera would gather more allies and workers after Disney's Sleeping Beauty was a box office failure and moved to Cahuenga Boulevard West, but since the space was small, employees were working from home. In the 1960s, the Flintstones would debut on ABC Primetime, based off of the hit show The Honeymooners. Jackie Gleason would get so jealous of the success of the modern Stone Age family that he would later take HB to court for copyright. However, has a change of heart as he did not want to be the guy who yanked Fred Flintstone off the air. With mixed reviews from the critics, the show would evolve for 6 seasons and become a family classic, thus taking home the longest animated television show in history until The Simpsons in 1997. The Flintstones was sponsored by Winston Cigarettes in the 1960s. The sitcom was seen as the Family Guy cartoon of its time. Cigarette commercials on primetime slots were the norm for the big three to the adult audiences. Later on in the seasons of the Flintstones, parents would spark outrage that Winston was being geared to their kids, as most families would watch the show together. In 1962, Winston would be dropped as a sponsor, while in 1963, Welch's would be the new sponsor, as the show was seen as kid-friendly, and Pebbles was a new character addition to the Flintstones family. Following the success of the Flintstones came Top Cat, Yogi Bear Show, The Jetsons, Wally Gator, Turtle Touche, and Dum Dum from 1961 to 1962. Hanna-Barbera would then extend itself further to a bigger studio on Cahuenga Boulevard West in 1963. The studio later separated from Screen Gems to sell Taft Broadcasting, following a lawsuit from the Crone family and Joan Perry for undervaluing the 18% stock after being sold. Following the lawsuits, the Magilla Gorilla Show, Johnny Quest, Adam Ant, Sinbad Jr. and His Magic Belt, and Secret Squirrel would follow in 1964 to 1965. Taft would then get HB for $12 million and become its distributor following the move. Space Ghost, Frankenstein Jr., and Laurel and Hardy would air in 1967. Hanna-Barbera would then get into business with Columbia Records to sell soundtracks under Hanna-Barbera Records, released by Colpix. In 1969, Scooby-Doo Where Are You premieres on CBS and becomes the second successful cartoon sitcom, and influences spin-offs such as The Scooby-Doo Show, Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo, and the new Scooby-Doo movies. Due to the success of mystery sitcoms involving teenagers and animal sidekicks, Hanna-Barbera would recreate the formula with cartoons such as Josie and the Pussycats, Jabberjaw, Speed Buggy, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids, and Inch High. There were a few others, but they didn't last long. In the 70s, to keep up with a younger demographic, the Flintstones would get a few spin-offs such as the Pebbles and Bam Bam Show, the new Fred and Barney Show, and the Flintstone Comedy Hour. HB would then partner with Post to release Pebbles cereal in 1971, and I know some of you are still eating that. Other cartoon sitcoms would get spin-offs as well to keep up with the changing times. Super Friends would come out of the studio in partnership with DC and receive spin-offs as well due to the success. Charlotte's Web, released by Paramount Pictures, would be the first Hanna-Barbera feature-length film that would not be based off of any spin-off cartoon sitcom, and take home a $2.4 million box office. Hanna-Barbera would then open an animation studio in Australia for 50% stock in 1974. American animation studios would be moving away from in-house productions in the later years. As a result, would resort to runaway production companies to save on cost. Ruby Spears Enterprises would form after working with Hanna-Barbera for almost a decade and would leave in 1977. Taft would then merge with World Vision Enterprises and become an HB distributor. In the early 1980s, Hanna-Barbera would see a decrease in viewership. The animation world would give the name the General Motors of cartoons, mainly because of the amount of cartoons churned out, as well as how many spin-offs Hanna-Barbera would have. But as time went on, Hanna-Barbera would lose the younger demographic, as Saban, Deke, Rankin and Bass, Marvel, and Sunbow would take over with cartoons that would be more intriguing to kids, making HB fall behind as the era it was created in wasn't interesting to modern-day kids, decreasing viewership and production from 80% down to 20%. Hanna-Barbera would also be in deep trouble in 1979. The studio during the turn of the decade would outsource to Taiwan and South Korea to meet deadlines and lessen costs while also working outside of US union laws. Most studios would look to Asian countries to do the finalizing, coloring, and cleaning of animation. And I know some of you are going to say, well, that was the norm anyway. I know. This would make Hanna-Barbera have 3/4 of its production outside of the United States from 1978 onward. IATSE and the Animation Guild would strike on August 7th of 1979. William Hanna would lose all of his employees, while Disney employees would turn violent as Ron W. Miller's car was kicked in by one employee. The strike reached a point to where Canadian animators from the Hanna-Barbera studio would lose their O-1B status and be deported back to Canada. Unemployment benefits were very low from the a union fund, and little news coverage was on the strike as SAG-AFTRA and NFL were still settling disputes during that time. October 16th, the strike ended as a contract to protect workers from outsourcing work to Asian countries was agreed upon. The aftermath left a very bad morale at Hanna-Barbera Studios and would never be the same since then.
Long, long ago, deep in the forest, there was a hidden village where tiny creatures lived.
After the strike of 1979, the Smurfs premiered. Based off of the Belgian comic by Pierre Culliford, it would be the third longest cartoon running for 9 seasons. Following this, Hanna-Barbera would work on the mini-series The Greatest Adventure, Stories from the Bible, which would have an impact on Christian viewers. The spin-offs were not doing as well during the mid to late 80s. Spin-offs of Johnny Quest, Flintstones, Yogi Bear, and the Snorks would air, but not receive the same viewership. During this time, World Vision would be sold to Aaron Spelling Productions. Hanna-Barbera would split off to HB Home Video, while Tom Ruegger would leave Hanna-Barbera for Warner Bros. After working on a pup named Scooby-Doo. Tom, as well as a dozen workers, would leave to work on Tiny Toon Adventures, while David Kirshner would be appointed the new CEO. Hanna-Barbera would then make more desperate attempts to cater to the youth by making video games and creating even more spin-offs like Yo Yogi, The Pirates of Dark Water, Tom and Jerry Kids, The Adventures of Don Coyote, and Midnight Patrol, Adventures in the Dream Zone. This would be the inevitable sale by this company by the turn of the 90s. Hanna-Barbera would fall irrelevant during the 90s. Ted Turner would not see it like that, as the Turner Broadcasting would outbid MCA and Hallmark Pictures for the whole Hanna-Barbera library, and then go into a 50-50 deal with the Apollo Investment Fund for $320 million. During the start of Cartoon Network, Scott Sassa would hire Fred Seibert after his successes on Nickelodeon with Nicktoons and his own skit show, Oh Yeah Cartoons. Fred would then hire John Kerfalsi, Donovan Cook, Craig McCracken, Jendi Tartarovsky, nailed it, Seth MacFarlane, Van Partable, and Butch Hartman, while on Cartoon Network launched in 1992. Under the Hanna-Barbera title, John would make The Day in the Life of Ranger Smith and Boo Boo Runs Wild. These would be rejected by Cartoon Network, however, the Spumco studio would collaborate to create Two Stupid Dogs with Donovan Cook. While this happens, Hanna-Barbera would rebrand to Hanna-Barbera Cartoons, while the Apollo remained with Turner for $255 million. Captain Planet and Droopy Master Detective would also follow with settlements. In 1995, Fred Seibert would revolutionize the Hanna-Barbera name by creating What a Cartoon, a skit show where cartoon pilots would air and then be pitched by network executives. In 1996, Dexter's Laboratory would premiere and become the first successful spin-off after What a Cartoon. To follow Dexter would be Cow and Chicken and Johnny Bravo. Cartoon Network would absorb Hanna-Barbera after the failure of saving the studio from demolition, and the Powerpuff Girls would air after the pilot Whoop-Ass Stew was demanded to be a show in 1998. In 1999, Warner Brothers would solidify Hanna-Barbera in its merger, and I Am Weasel would be the final cartoon coming out of Hanna-Barbera. In the later years, Hanna would pass away due to throat cancer on March 22nd of 2001. Joseph Barbera would pass away at the age of 95 due to natural causes in December 18th of 2006. The cartoons that come out of Hanna-Barbera shaped a whole 2 decades of cartoons, as well as created a community for families to share and grow with the characters. From the Flintstones to the Jetsons, Hanna-Barbera's formula might be redundant, second to the chase scene transitions they used to do. Its philosophy was to create a winning formula, but lost sight of changing the content by creating too many carbon copies and not evolving with the times until its dormancy. Just because of past and futuristic family work does not mean people wanted spin-offs of it. Just because a show with teenagers and a dog worked doesn't mean people wanted to see more teenage mystery shows with animal slapstick. As Hanna-Barbera saw its final years with Warner Bros., it took Fred Seibert to channel the brand in a different direction. But by that time, it was too late. The damage was irreversible, and even today it still is, as some person thought it was a great idea to take a character. And Hanna-Barbera from past to present still stays with us, whether boomer or Gen Z. Or millennial. You know, just because. From the lyrics to the theme songs to the iconic catchphrases, Hanna-Barbera has left a staple that can never be replaced. Cue the groovies.
We got a gorilla for sale, Magilla gorilla for sale. We got a gorilla for sale, Magilla gorilla for sale. Won't you buy him? I take a look, try him.
Me and my friends get no respect. What does Scooby-Doo that we neglect? We be putting all our foes in check.
We must all get ready now.